Victoria is the California of Australia, and that is not a compliment. If I described a place as a failed one-party state with businesses and residents fleeing in droves as crime and homelessness take over their city, which once upon a time was an enviable city with a wonderful lifestyle that people flocked to enjoy, would you think I was describing Melbourne or San Francisco? Of course, I'm describing both, and that's the problem. Victoria is a cautionary tale in Australia. You can live high on the hog, intoxicated by fables of government-funded bliss for a time. But living on the credit card only lasts so long. Eventually, the bills need to be paid and you end up exactly where Victoria is, still trying to fund these obscenely expensive spending promises on the one hand, whilst trying to avoid bankruptcy on the other. And as the people of Victoria are finding out the hard way, it's not the politicians who pay for this folly, it's them. Paying through eye-watering tax hikes which are destroying businesses, retirements and lives. In this video, I'm going to lay some groundwork to help you understand a bit about how taxes work in Australia and the limited options that a near-bankrupt state like Victoria has, so that we can better understand why Victoria is doing what it's doing, what the consequences are likely to be, and what you might want to consider doing in response if you're unlucky enough to live in Victoria. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to make sense of the nonsense that we see in the world around us. Now, I am 100% viewer supported, so head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, check out my books, my DVDs, my merch, and help me to keep producing videos like this one. Now, Victoria's new property taxes have bitten hard, hitting the news as outraged Victorians count the cost of their state's financial mismanagement. The particular issue is these new land taxes which are hurting businesses and investors. Two stories which have already been widely reported but are by no means unique are the story of Angie Romas, whose sandblasting business in Dandenong has seen his land tax bill jump from $8,700 to over $200,000 in less than 10 years, with further increases every year expected going forward. And also the story of Gary Salathiel, a 72-year-old struggling to retire because his investment property is suddenly costing him an extra $2,500 a year just in the increased land tax on top of the existing land tax and on top of all of the other fees and charges and expenses as well. Now you might think, so what? Business owners make money, property investors must be rich, so who cares if we sting them for more tax? Why shouldn't they pay their fair share? And if that's what you think, then you'll be pleased to know that you are on the fast track to Venezuela, along with the Victorian government and sadly the rest of Victoria with you. Because businesses and investors make money only when they bring value to their customers. In other words, they only make money when they offer something which someone else wants to pay for, something which others see value in and choose to pay money for. That's how they make money. To say it another way, businesses only make money if they offer people something which makes their lives better. So you can demonize businesses and investors if you wish, but without them, we will have far fewer people making the world a better place, and that means a lower quality of life for us all. In layman's terms, this Dandenong sandblasting business employs a dozen people and provides services which are needed. And they can only keep providing those services and employing those people if it's possible to keep making a profit, to keep making money for doing what they do. Increasing their land tax bill by nearly $200,000 a year would push most small businesses into shutting their doors, and in fact, it is pushing many into shutting down as we speak, because this increase doesn't just apply to the businesses that are being talked about in the news, it applies to every business in Victoria with land, and most of them simply cannot afford to be taxed like this, especially the small ones. At a minimum, this is going to lead to people being laid off and losing their jobs. And at worst, it's going to cause a sharp economic downturn in Victoria as businesses shut their doors or go interstate. But believe it or not, the Victorian government doesn't actually care because of how our taxes work. And it's here that I need to explain a few things about the Australian tax landscape. We have federal taxes such as income tax and the GST, and we have state taxes such as land taxes and stamp duty and payroll tax and the like. The taxing powers of the different levels of government are deliberately separated. They're not duplicated. The federal government imposes certain kinds of taxes, and state governments are not permitted to duplicate those taxes. So states, for example, cannot impose their own GST or their own income tax in Australia. That is reserved for the federal government only under our system as it currently stands. And that distinction matters, because when a state is in financial trouble and is desperate for cash, they'll raise the taxes that benefit the state regardless of how those taxes impact the overall tax take, i.e., how the increased state-level taxes might actually decrease the federal-level tax take. The irony of what the Victorian government is doing is that whilst it will raise a little more cash for them, for the Victorian state government, it won't raise nearly as much as they think, for reasons I'll go into in a moment, but more than that. For every dollar the Victorian government raises, they will destroy so much economic activity that in the end it will cost multiple dollars in lost tax dollars for the federal government, making the overall economic and government debt situation worse than it already is. These jobs that will be lost if that sandblasting company, for example, has to lay off some workers, well, that will lead to reduced income tax revenue for the federal government. But the Victorian state government doesn't care about that because that's not their income tax. The economic slowdown in Victoria that will come from businesses going bankrupt, well, that'll reduce the GDP every year and will therefore reduce the amount of GST tax collected by the government, federal, not to mention corporate income tax. But again, the Victorian state government doesn't care about that because they don't receive any of those tax dollars. They are putting more tax dollars into their pockets thanks to this state land tax, and they don't care how many dollars are therefore missing from the economy or from the federal tax take. And this is because taxes on land are, comparatively speaking, compared to taxes on economic activity, taxes on land are non-elastic, or in other words, people can't really change their behaviour very much in response to these new land taxes. I mean, the land exists and it's in private hands, so someone is going to own it, which means that someone is going to be liable to pay these new taxes, whether they like it or not. Now, this contrasts with other more elastic types of taxes. Take, for example, a tax on tobacco or alcohol. In theory, no one has to buy any tobacco or alcohol products at all. So in theory, obviously not in practice, but in theory, people could simply refuse to buy those goods and the tax take would drop to zero. Whereas with land ownership, in theory, someone's name's on that title. And even if they sell it to someone else, there will be a name on that title. Someone is going to own that land, which means that someone is going to be taxable. The amount of land privately owned in Victoria isn't going to go down unless the government starts buying it back, which they're not going to do. So the government believes that this is the perfect target for punitive taxes because it's not elastic. Someone is going to be on the hook for that money. The devastation that these punitive property taxes will cause to other parts of the economy which are elastic, well, that's not their problem because those aren't their taxes. The loss of income tax revenue, who cares? That's a federal government problem. The loss of GST, as the GDP collapses, whatever. This state will get their land taxes and that's all they really care about. But here's the thing. The amount of land privately owned in Victoria won't fall because it can't, but the value of that land most certainly can. Businesses that can move out of Victoria will do so. And tech and service businesses, well, they can move relatively quickly. Industry will move more slowly, but mark my words, it will move. Often, business actually moves invisibly. Government will tell itself that any manufacturing or industrial businesses are pretty much stuck. The costs of moving all of those facilities and machines are so high that they can count on those businesses having to stay. And they're half right. You see, those businesses can't move. It's prohibitively expensive, but their customers can. Their customers can change their suppliers, who they order from, and those customers can take their business to a different state, to a supplier who isn't subject to these punitive land taxes and therefore can offer lower prices. So the government is half right. Many businesses won't be able to move, but they will lose their customers and go bankrupt. It's business moving out of the state by proxy. See, there's a thing called the Laffer curve, and it shows how once taxes get too high, raising the tax rate further actually causes a drop in tax revenue. And that's because of elasticity, people changing their behaviour in response to the increasing taxes, as well as the way that the taxes destroy the economies that they are parasites on. So whilst the government thinks that this tax will be inelastic because the land will always be there, they're not properly taking into account the devastating effect that these taxes will have on those land values. These new Victorian land taxes, along with the COVID debt levy and the mental health levy, all of which are on top of the plethora of existing taxes, they will work at first in the sense that they will raise revenue for the Victorian government. But the more these taxes work, the more they will hurt and the more they will change the behaviour of Victorians and Australians. It is going to be difficult, if not impossible, for Victorian businesses to compete with their interstate counterparts. Contracts will move interstate, jobs will be lost, businesses will shut down, and the losses in income tax and GST for the federal government will at least equal, if not exceed, whatever revenue the Victorian government raises. But then will come the real sting in the tail. You see, lost economic activity will cause commercial and industrial property to fall in value. Unlike residential real estate, which is pretty much immune to oversupply in Australia, commercial and industrial real estate is much more volatile because demand can drop below supply, meaning that there's a glut, there's a surplus, there's land and there's buildings and property that people don't actually want right now. And if these land taxes have the effect that I expect them to have over the next 3 years, then we are going to see a significant economic contraction in Victoria, leading to a fall in commercial and industrial real estate values. And because land tax is calculated as a percentage of the land's value, ultimately we're going to see land tax revenues plateau or even fall. But that's still not the worst of it. If commercial and industrial land values drop as sharply as they can during an economic contraction, then owners will find themselves underwater or owing more to the bank than what that land is actually worth. At that point, we might see banks moving into foreclose, leading to a glut of worthless commercial property on the market and driving a deeper recession. Or even if the banks don't move in, we'll see increasing numbers of commercial and industrial property owners who simply cannot sell their properties for more than what they owe. They've lost their tenants to insolvency or bankruptcy, and now they're being sent a land tax bill by the Victorian government that they simply cannot afford to pay. Victoria is the California of Australia, and that is not a good thing. Now, if you've been following my work for at least a few years, then this will come as no surprise to you. I've been saying this for ages, and I wish that they would stop proving me right. Me personally, I called Melbourne home for 38 years. I left Victoria a little over 2 years ago, and I can tell you I don't regret it. Now, of course, not everyone can leave. There's many good reasons why people might choose to stay, and if that's you, then carefully consider how you can minimize your exposure to the likelihood of a statewide economic downturn and to rising cost of doing business. If you can earn your money online, then I suggest you look into the Nomad Capitalist. I'll put a link to their website in the description of this video. To be clear, there is no affiliation between me and them. They don't know that I exist, and they don't know that I'm recommending their work. And I stand to gain absolutely nothing from this recommendation, financial or otherwise. But if you earn your money online, or you can, but for personal reasons or other reasons you're going to keep living in Victoria, then I strongly urge you to check out Nomad Capitalist and specifically learn more about their flag theory, which is how you can shelter yourself from the worst of the coming storm by splitting your life up into different jurisdictions. I'll let them explain that in detail. The link is in the description. However, if you're an employee or otherwise not able to shelter your income and assets and you insist on staying in Victoria, then I'm sorry, but you're in a tough spot. I've been warning for more than 5 years that Victoria is a failed state, the California of Australia, and I believed it so strongly that I moved my family out. I put my money where my mouth is. I know how hard it is to move. I have family in Victoria too, and I had called Melbourne home for pretty much my entire life. My wife had called Melbourne home for her entire life. But we cannot let our nostalgia for the past blind us to the realities of the present. I don't see Victoria changing direction anytime soon. I hope I'm wrong about that. But we're talking about a state that re-elected Daniel Andrews with an increased majority after he became one of the worst human rights abusers in modern Australian history. Victorians lined up for that easy COVID money. They sat on the couch for Daniel Andrews' daily press conferences and they rolled up their sleeves for the jabs. Now the bill is due. Property investors are being stung thousands. Business owners are being stung hundreds of thousands. And the state is cycling deeper into the downward spiral of a failed state. I can't save you. I can only warn you. And if it turns out by some miracle that I'm wrong and that it's not too late and that Victoria does somehow save itself, and to be clear, I hope they do. But if I'm wrong, just know that I put my money where my mouth is. I moved out of Victoria with my 3 young children from my home city of 38 years, which I loved and had planned to grow old in. And I did that because Victoria is no longer the place that I grew up in. And I won't let my nostalgia for the Victoria of the past steal my future or my children's futures. Victoria is a failed state. I wish it were not so. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to understand the world as it changes around you. Now, I wish I could be the bearer of better news today, but I have to say what I see. And in Victoria, I see tough times ahead. If this video has been valuable or thought-provoking or insightful for you, then you will love my books, my DVDs, and my merch. And by grabbing some for yourself, you'll be helping me to keep bringing you content like this. So head over to goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com and grab my best-selling books, my award-winning documentary, or my funny and thought-provoking merch, and you'll be helping me to keep doing what I do. Thank you for watching to the end. Please like, comment, subscribe, check out this recommended video, and as always, stay free.